From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Potcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And that's my opportunity to welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast for another episode. I appreciate the fact that you keep coming back. Thank you so much. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is your very first time. Well, there's an especially warm welcome waiting for you. We're going to share over the next 30 or 40 minutes a lot of information about a plant I am absolutely passionate about, and that, of course, is cannabis. I'm going to assume you have some affinity to that plant as well. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Now, before we get too much further, let me remind you this podcast is intended for those of legal consumption age in your jurisdiction and is intended purely for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. In episode 178, we mark the 6th anniversary for legalized cannabis in Canada. Yay, we made it. Well, there's a few issues we understand. We're also going to take a look at how that has changed for the medical cannabis landscape. We have some recent rulings that deny impairment from THC because they weren't impaired. Why is it so hard to shut down the illicit sites that are running rampant online? A story on that. A BC company has released a breathalyzer to detect cannabis use, and the changing retail markets of Ontario and Quebec. We have a story on that. On Cultivar Corner, brought to you by Up & Smoke, I sample a direct delivery exclusive from Amani Craft Specimen X Premium Smalls. All of that and more on episode 178 of the Cannabis Potcast. And of course, before we get too far, let me thank you for being here. I always appreciate the fact that you come back listening to the Cannabis Podcast. I also want to thank my supporters, Jordana at buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. If you feel so inclined and you like what you hear, you can go there too and buy me a doobie. I also want to thank my patrons at Patreon. Tony, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Roger, I truly appreciate your support each and every month. Thank you. And now, let's get to our first story. And for this story, we're going to the ounce.ca, and this was special to the OZ. With October 17th marking the 6th anniversary of recreational cannabis legalization in Canada, a Brock researcher says it's time to examine how the process has impacted the medical cannabis market. Associate Professor of Operations Research Michael Armstrong's new study shows that while the shift to nationwide legalization was accompanied by fewer patients in the medical market, access to recreational cannabis hasn't made the program obsolete. Overall, many patients did leave Canada's medical cannabis system around the time of legalization, but that decline may not have been all bad news. It might partly have represented a right sizing of the system, with some people exiting who maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place, Armstrong says. The data also shows patients who remained in the medical system stabilized their purchasing rates and increased their purchase sizes, suggesting there is still a legitimate appetite for medical cannabis system. In the newly published Associations Between Canada's Recreational Cannabis Legalization and Medical Cannabis Patient Activity 2017 to 2022, Armstrong examined Health Canada data regarding how many patients registered to use medicinal cannabis, how often they purchased, and how much they bought per order. He then looked for behavioral patterns coinciding with the passage of the Cannabis Act in June 2018. The launch of recreational sales in October 2018, and the arrival of edibles and other processed products in stores in December of 2019. While patient registrations had been increasing prior to legalization, the study showed the number of Canadians seeking medical cannabis licenses from Health Canada began changing in July 2018, right after the law was passed and months before it took effect. Alberta saw the sharpest decline in registrations in the country when the Act passed. In Ontario, by contrast, registration rates merely slowed down around that time, gradually leveling off later, Armstrong says. The study also showed there was little change to registrations or purchase sizes after cannabis stores first opened and sales officially began in October 2018. Medical purchase frequencies, however, did decline. Armstrong says this may have been due to retail stores offering the same product as medical suppliers at first, providing additional access to the product but no real incentive to leave the system entirely. Perhaps the biggest change in patient behavior came when cannabis offerings expanded to include products like edibles, beverages, and vapes. Registration numbers also fell during this time, but the frequency of purchases stabilized, and the amount of purchased per order grew. It seems the remaining patients becoming more active after these products became available in late 2019, says Armstrong. Producers with a good selection of edibles may have started getting larger orders, while other producers lost their patients to the recreational market and its wider selection. And as for what the future holds, Armstrong doesn't anticipate major fluctuations in these trends for the foreseeable future, unless the government were to make changes to the pricing structure or accessibility of medicinal cannabis. If the excise tax or sales tax on medical cannabis was removed, that could potentially make it cheaper and more attractive than recreational cannabis, he says. If medical cannabis was available from the local drugstore, which also gives the buyer access to a pharmacist and some medical guidance, that could also lead to increased interest in the medical route. Canada's long history with medical cannabis and being a leader in cannabis legalization also makes it well equipped to serve as a model to other countries on what to expect as they navigate the legalization process, Armstrong says. Simply put, the message would be that you should expect big changes to your medical market after legalization, but you shouldn't expect it to suddenly disappear, and that partly depends on variables like the product selections you have and how competitive the two systems are, he says. And that article from the Brock News, recreated on theounce.ca, where do you think we are? We're 6 years into legalization. What's changed from your perspective?
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And to StrikeCan.com for the next story, this is written by Jonathan Hilt. If the Canadian cannabis industry were a painting, it would be more Jackson Pollock than Rembrandt. While the country made history by being the second after Uruguay to legalize, it also became a canary in a coal mine, so to speak, showing others in waiting various examples of success and failure. There's likely no better display of this legalization kaleidoscope than the mishmash of retail frameworks that exist across the country. Each province has its unique take on the supply chain and the stores themselves, and all of it is subjectively working or not, depending on who you talk to. Strachan wanted to examine two very different yet profitable business models, Quebec and Ontario, and ask some experts what works for these strategies, what doesn't, and where they may be 5 to 10 years down the road. Some of the people who notice the most wins and losses in each of these two frameworks are the producers and suppliers of cannabis products in Canada. They have the task of adhering to an endless list of nuances that exist in this countrywide variety pack of rules and regulations. Quebec came in with probably the biggest apprehension of any province. I think we're still seeing that today, said Nathan Misson, president of Diplomat Consulting. Quebec has the advantage of an efficient one-store mentality where stores are not competing with each other as they all sit under the same umbrella, and distribution is relatively consistent for your products amongst them, said Margaret Brody, CEO of Rubicon Organics. Ontario's setup is a free market retail approach, where locations, products, and store setups are individualized to ownership, meaning variety for the shopper. As a result, the Ontario consumer experience is different in almost every store visit, where Quebec is homogenous, other than its nursery program. Brody listed some of the other important differences as well, including Quebec does not have vapes, topicals, or traditional edible formats. Quebec lists its menu by THC across most categories. Quebec does not allow in-store education or LP marketing materials, which makes it difficult to educate bud tenders on brands and products, although they have recently announced that educational videos on brands will be allowed and provided to store staff for training purposes. And Quebec does not allow products over 30% THC, including concentrates, which, in Brody's view, only supports the black market. Misson also agrees that there are challenges in the framework for the Quebec model that hinder efforts to eliminate the black market. I think Quebec has a significant problem, especially with, in my opinion, their short-sightedness on vape and edible products that have allowed the illicit market to flourish. Speaking on the same topic of what's going right and wrong in these markets, Misson added, it depends on whom you ask. In Quebec, I would say they're doing it right for the government, which is creating revenues that go into government coffers, he said. I think their Buy Quebec model that is in their regulations has made it so that Quebec licensed producers are some of the most robust and successful in the country. Misson went on to add that, from his perspective, the SQDC did the bare minimum that was required at the beginning of legalization. He feels this has led to a limited number of retailers and the province's population being underserved. In Quebec, I would say they're doing it right for the government, which is creating revenues that go into government coffers, he said. I think their Buy Quebec model that is in their regulations has made it so that Quebec licensed producers are some of the most robust and successful in the country. He went on to say that Ontario punched themselves in the face to get where they are today, referring to the ridiculous amount of lotteries they did. Despite that, he feels the Ontario model is a success. It probably has allowed for the proliferation of legal stores and displacement of the illicit market. As for what needs to be changed, Misson feels that a piece of low-hanging fruit is taking window coverings down in retail stores in Quebec and Ontario, just as other provinces have done. He also has thoughts on other modifications. I believe in a hybrid model. There should be private wholesale and distribution as well as government wholesale and distribution, he said. I also think the end of prohibited relationships is going to be a big change. Ontario will go first, and Quebec will go kicking and screaming. No other retail environment in Canada prohibits a producer and a retailer to have direct relationships, treat cannabis the same as alcohol. Misson added that he would also like to see changes in how and where Canadians and tourists can consume, not just in Quebec and Ontario, but everywhere. The proliferation and opportunity we're seeing in the United States with cannabis hotels and consumption sites, therapeutic use in spas, Canada has an opportunity to see that. Two jurisdictions like Ontario and Quebec that hold the vast majority of the Canadian population are probably more important to the success and viability of that opportunity. Brody also shared some diverse thoughts on what she would like to see moving forward so producers can have a healthier landscape in which to do business. I'd like to see enforcement against the black market in both provinces and nationwide, in particular, shutting down online storefronts delivering in major centres within 45 minutes, she said. She added that Ontario came out in its recent budget with $30 million for enforcement efforts, and she would like to see the federal government and other provinces follow suit. If there are no changes to enforcement, then reduce our fees and taxes, so that legal businesses can compete on a level playing field. Brody would like to see some additional changes to both models. For Quebec, an increase in the number of stores, more product education, and making vape products available are on her wish list. For Ontario, I'd love to see more data from the OCS for LPs, to know where our product is sold so we can support those stores with education, as well as more frequent product calls. From a public safety perspective, I'd like to see the elimination of store window coverings, which reduces risk to retail employees who work alone or at night in stores, and reduces stigma related to cannabis products. And there you go. There's the situation now and a little bit of foresight into the future in the retail market in Quebec and Ontario.
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner. Cultivar Corner, oh yeah, Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
Welcome to Cultivar Corner, brought to you by Up & Smoke at 258 West Broadway in Vancouver and online at itsupndsmoke.com. Check them out today for some direct delivery exclusives like we're sampling today. Amani Craft Specimen X. This is exclusive to the direct delivery channel, and lucky for you, you can see it when you go to itsupndsmoke.com, and if you're of legal age and live in BC, you can check it out for yourself and even have it sent to you. Now, I forgot about the mosaic of approaches across our country. Unfortunately, if you live in another province, we can tease you with it, but if you don't live in BC, you're going to have to talk to your MP about getting it sent to you. And now, let's get to the goods. This is Amani Craft, which we have sampled before. They grow in a facility just on the edge of Lake Country and delivered through direct delivery. This is Specimen X Premium Smalls, a combination of Project 4516 and Devil Driver. So this is a hybrid, probably about 50-50. I have no idea exactly what the specifics of the hybridization of it are, but nonetheless, we'll give it a try. So picked up 3.5 grams, and let's see what we got. So our package date on this guy was September 17th. So just literally a month from the day that it was packaged, and it's in my hands, and I'm able to open it up. Well, am I able to open it up? This is always the difficult piece. There it is. I see where I'm going wrong. I'm grabbing the wrong side. There. Once I have both sides of it, it's actually pretty easy to open. Oh, my. Doesn't that smell delicious? Oh, there's got to be some peppery notes in there. Some candy notes. My total terpenes on here are 2.7. I've got limonene at 0.64, caryophyllene. There's the spiciness at 0.19, and pinene at 0.15. So, going to be a little bit of the spiking on the pinene. So let's see what we got from a temperature or from a weight perspective. Get that last bud out of there. Come on, get down there. Oh, there it is. Alrighty, perfect. 3.49. I can accept that. That's the end result, and now let's take a peek at some of these buds. So again, this is from Amani Craft, and the folks at Amani Craft, we got Amin, we've got Anna, and we got Tom, busy working out in their Lake Country facility, doing a fabulous job as they bring all of this weed to market. And boy, does this ever look nice. Pulling out my jeweler's loop here. And let's take a peek at the flower we've got. Wow, is this ever nicely manicured. These buds are just... You see the work that some people do and you go, wow. They really took that down to the nth degree. This is just perfectly finished and wonderfully cured. So I'm looking at it into my jeweler's loop. And trichome rich. I got trichome fields all over the place. So we are looking at really a nice, kind of a light green, lots of red hair pistils. Lots of red pistils throughout this particular bud. Is it sticky? As it sits there, it's a little bit of sticky, but I bet if I break that bud up and I start to pull it out that way, oh yeah, there comes the stick. And there comes some more aroma. So let's tell you what we got here in the description for Specimen X. Buds are very dense, and boy is that ever true, with an eye-catching exotic structure. Specimen X is coated in a thick, shimmering layer of milky trichomes over dark purple and green calyxes with a beautiful abundance of fiery orange pistils. That's a great way to describe that, and boy, there sure are a lot of them. Especially when I pull up the jeweler's loop and I pull it in there. Oh, there's just all kinds of fiery red orange pistils. Expect a nose of sweet vanilla cream with floral notes. Okay, definitely some floral notes on there. I'm not picking up the sweet vanilla cream, but that might be just my nose. The buds are hand-trimmed and cured for a minimum of 21 days and never irradiated. So terps are 2.7. My THC, have we touched on the THC yet? No, we haven't. And the THC on this guy is sitting at 26.1%. And it's time we did some grinding. And we got ourselves prepped to have a taste of Specimen X. And remember, of course, you can always check out itsupandsmoke.com for what's available on the direct delivery. And if you live in BC, you're welcome to place your order and have it sent to you. Matt and Sarah do a great job at Up and Smoke. So happy to have an association with them now. And an association with helping to bring some different cultivars to the market and some different cultivars for our world to explore and examine. So let me get my grinder going. Oh, much more aroma as I start to break those buds up. This was harvested on July 19th, and then it went through that slow cure and all of that, the various work that they do with it after they have harvested, and the package date was 9/17. That's when it came to the market. This is another opportunity for me to share some great weed with you on Cultivar Corner. You know that we have done over 150 cultivars since we started this way back in 2018. We've been doing this for 6 years now. Pretty exciting. And I hope you've had some enjoyment along the way and enjoyed a few of the cultivars. I know that is one thing that I hear from listeners, that the Cultivar Corner is one of the favorite features of what we do on Cultivar or on the Cannabis Podcast. So I've got my Mighty warming up, and then we're going to try the Specimen X. So this is Project 4516 and Devil Driver. Cultivar Corner brought to you by Up and Smoke. Let's have a sample of Amani Craft Specimen X. 3.5 grams of premium smalls, and this is a hybrid. So I don't know where that's going to take me in terms of my endocannabinoid system and where the high is going to arrive today. Not picking up a lot of flavor on the joint, but it is smooth. I'm not picking up anything that kind of turns me off or makes me not want to smoke anymore. And the Mighty is up to speed, so let's have a taste from the vaporizer and see what kind of flavors we can get. Okay, so there are some of those floral notes. Oh, definitely. Even picking up a little bit of that sweet vanilla cream when I pull it out of the vaporizer. Now, I am running this right now at 180 degrees Celsius, and let me drop that back down to 175 or 176. Get a bit more of the flavor components. And I'm also finding when I run it at those temperatures, this is giving me a pretty good pack. Oh, definitely some of those floral notes. A little bit of the spiciness from the caryophyllene. Oh, that is really tasty. And then we put the vaporizer down and we go back to the joint and we see where this is going to take us to. Oh, my. So again, really smooth on the joint. Let's take a peek at what we got from an ash and see how that is flying along as it develops and pulls itself down. Let me take another hit. Nice gray ash. Falls off rather nicely when I'm done with it. So I again have to say that the flowers are just beautiful. Really, really nicely hand trimmed, and they've done some good work as they have been working through these. They are really dense. They are really tightly packed. You do have to break them up when you pull them out for your grinder. But they are sticky. Once we start to break them up, we can get some of that stickiness on there. Okay, a couple of hits off the joint, a couple of hits off the Mighty. And my ECS, my endocannabinoid system, is starting to fire. As those receptors in my spinal cord and in my brain start to wake up with a little bit of hybrid activity. I'm hoping that the hybridness is kind of going to go smack dab in the middle here. I'm hoping it's not going to send me down for a couch later today, but I also don't want to go out and run a marathon either. So I'm really hoping for a 50-50 hybrid today. I have no sense of where that's going to go, but definitely the endocannabinoid system is waking up. I'm not picking up any happy eyes as of this point, but that's not unusual for hybrids. Those happy eyes usually come from pretty heavy sativas for me, and sometimes some heavy indicas. And I know we're not supposed to talk about these sativa and indicas, but let's be honest. We're looking for a specific effect. And unfortunately, because of the way that we have been raised and learned our cannabis, we fall into that pretty rapidly. And I know that I do that too, and I apologize for it. I wish I didn't. But very clearly, when I'm smoking at night, I want something that's going to help me sleep, because I sleep really well. And when I'm in the daytime, I want something that's going to help me get some stuff going in the daytime. So this is where, for me, the hybrids kind of play as a daytime. And so I'm feeling this is going to be a pretty good daytime. Let me pop up the Mighty one more time. Oh, definitely more of those fruity and floral notes that come out of that. And then there's a bit of a spiciness on the exhale, which I'm thinking is going to be the caryophyllene. Oh, yeah. Really, really tasty. Really, really nice. Let's pop up the joint and let's finish that guy off. And my endocannabinoid system is firing on all cylinders. Oh, that is nice. Okay, there's even a bit of happy eyes coming in there. Just kind of sneaking in through the back door. The euphoria is up here. That sense of wonderment with what cannabis does for our endocannabinoid system is with me strongly. Yeah, and now I'm starting to ramble, and now the endocannabinoid system is firing on all cylinders, and boom, 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 boom. This could be another fun day. Again, I'm doing my Cultivar Corners in the morning because that's when I get the best sense of how things are hitting, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. I think this is going to be a good indication. This hybrid from Amani Craft Specimen X, which was and is a cross of Project 4516 and Devil Driver. It's a hybrid. It's giving me some nice euphoric, really nice euphoria in my head right now. Definitely not moving into any kind of a body stone. It's kind of staying up there in the head. A little bit of a body relaxation, a little bit of a rush down my back. But I think for the most part, this is going to hang around here. This is going to be a sativa-leaning hybrid, or rather, let me re-express that. This would be more of a daytime-leaning hybrid, where you can do it in the daytime and not worry about the day wasted away on you. At least that's what we hope. And remember, if you want to check this out for yourself, go to itsupandsmoke.com. You can check out the menu for the direct delivery. This from Amani Craft. You can pick some up for yourself if you're in BC and you're in legal age. Again, if you're in another province, I'm afraid you're going to have to talk to your MP and see if we can fix that. Yeah, I am liking the hybrid nature of this, and I'm thinking this is going to be one fine day. And in usual fashion, it's been rolling around in my endocannabinoid system for a while, and this is becoming a lot more fun. Really feeling some nice giggly stuff coming out of here, and just a nice euphoria that kind of sets me up for a really happy day. And I never want to turn down a happy day.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
For our next story, we're going to 420intel.com. This one written by Yelena Martinovic. A 3-judge panel in Arizona ruled recently that driving after consuming marijuana cannot be penalized if the driver is not impaired. The move effectively overruled previous decisions by an administrative law judge whose reasoning was upheld by the Maricopa County Superior Court. After being pulled over by a police officer for speeding in October of 2022, Aaron Kirsten, who did not want to take a field sobriety test, blew a 0.083 after doing a breathalyzer test, slightly above the state limit. He was later subjected to a blood test while in custody, with results showing blood alcohol content of 0.063, below the 0.08 maximum. However, when the DPS tested Kirsten's blood for drugs, the analysis identified tetrahydrocannabinol metabolites, cannabis, in the sample, which led to the Arizona Department of Transportation, the ADOT, suspending his license for 90 days. ADOT justified its decision by referencing a state law that prohibits driving with any detectable THC metabolites. Previous research has shown that an inactive metabolite of THC, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, the intoxicating cannabinoid known for creating euphoric or stoned effects, is stored in body fat and is gradually eliminated through urine and feces, remaining in the body for far longer than active THC. Moreover, a recently published study by the University of California at Davis found that there's no direct relationship between impairment and THC concentrations in the subject's bodily fluids they analyzed. That's consistent with the opinions of numerous traffic safety groups, including the National Highway Safety Administration and the American Automobile Association. Current methods that focus on THC and/or metabolite concentrations in blood, saliva, urine, or exhaled breath can lead to false positive results for recent use due to the persistence of THC well outside of the typical 3 to 4 hour window of potential impairment following cannabis inhalation. The administrative law judge ruled it was irrelevant whether Kirsten had consumed marijuana within 24 hours of his arrest, affirming the ADOT's decision. Kirsten then appealed the verdict to the Maricopa County Superior Court. And finally, the Arizona Court of Appeals ruled in Kirsten's favor, following his appeal, citing voter-established laws that prevent the state from penalizing drivers who have legally consumed marijuana products but are not impaired while driving. And this reinforces our understanding of the voter's intent, expressed through the enactment of Proposition 207, that unimpaired driving after consuming marijuana cannot be penalized, the judge wrote. And this is an area of the cannabis explosion that we are going to continue to see as there's more and more exposure to these various tests that are coming out, and trying to determine whether someone is impaired simply based by the amount of THC that still resides in their body may be a little difficult going forward. A story from the Outs.ca written by Pat Bulmer on BC company targeting new cannabis breathalyzer at employers. A Burnaby company unveiled the latest edition of its cannabis breathalyzer at a conference this week in St. Louis. Cannabis Technologies has been developing the product with Ohio-based Omega Laboratories. The new version incorporates several new features to meet market and emerging regulatory requirements, Cannabis said in a news release prior to the event. In particular, its breathalyzers are trying to detect delta-9 THC, the psychoactive component of marijuana. Breath testing for delta-9 THC would allow employers and law enforcement to identify recent marijuana use, Cannabis says. Omega scientists have developed a breath sample test that successfully detects, isolates, and quantifies delta-9 THC, delta-8 THC, CBN, and CBD, the news release said. In particular, Cannabis has upgraded its breath collection unit, handheld technology to include an on-demand periodic quality assurance check, a new startup self-check, and new ambient air sample collection procedure. The sample collection cartridge has been modified to be able to collect a single sample or dual sample, consistent with federally regulated programs that require a simultaneous A-B sample collection. Dr. Bruce Golderberg from the University of Florida presented the company's breathalyzer at the Society of Forensic Toxicologists Conference, which began October 10th. While Cannabis says its breathalyzers may be used by employers, workplace rules in Canada will make that a rare event. Technologies being developed by Cannabis will allow for more relevant THC detection from breath, allowing employers to create an on-site regimen whereby they can perform pre-access and post-incident testing for recent use of cannabis, Cannabis says on its website. But OSG, a company that provides workplace health and safety training in Ontario, notes on its webpage Drug Testing at Work, the companies generally cannot test workers for drugs. There are some circumstances in which drug testing is allowed, though they are rare and very specific, OSG says, citing dangerous workplaces, reasonable suspicion of impairment, and when testing is part of a rehabilitation or return-to-work program. Employment and Social Development Canada notes, Cannabis Act includes amendments to the Non-Smokers Health Act to prohibit the smoking and vaping of cannabis in workplaces. The government agency said testing is permitted in federally regulated workplaces in limited circumstances. Random testing of employees in safety-sensitive positions may be permissible in the following limited circumstances: where the employer is able to show that there is a demonstrated alcohol or drug abuse problem amongst employees in safety-sensitive positions in the workplace, and testing is a proportionate response. In other words, when potential safety benefits outweigh potential intrusion into employee privacy, and when the employer still meets its duty to accommodate employees who test positive. In an online privacy handbook, the BC Civil Liberties Association confirms drug testing is allowed in limited circumstances. As in all cases involving privacy rights, the privacy rights of the employee must be balanced against the needs of the employer to collect, use, and disclose the personal information, the BCCLA said in 2015. Random drug testing of the entire workforce is generally not permissible, but random breathalyzer tests are permitted in safety-sensitive workplaces. In British Columbia and Alberta, in workplaces that are more safety-sensitive, the employer is permitted to institute a drug testing policy, including, in Alberta, pre-employment testing, without having to prove that a drug problem exists in the workplace. And there's some interesting information from Cannabis Technologies working with Ohio-based Omega Laboratories for a breathalyzer to detect Delta-9 THC. It will be interesting to see where this goes in the future.
Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And this story we're picking up from Strachan.com. This was written by Jonathan Hiltz. Despite almost 6 years of legal regulated cannabis in Canada, illicit online retailers continue to prosper, seemingly with minimal interference from federal authorities. These unlicensed sellers operate without regulation, with limited retail expenses, and almost no tax obligations compared to the rigorous requirements expected of licensed stores. Industry players see this long-standing problem and continued proliferation as a threat to an already beleaguered sector that is doing its best to adapt to a minefield of challenges. There has been little to no enforcement, whether that is law enforcement or through website owners and registrars, said Adrian Cheek, lead researcher for COIUS, a data company that examines all types of illicit online activity. Cheek added that this lack of enforcement is not a new kink in the system, but something that has gone almost unchecked since legalization in 2018. He explained that there are several different reasons for this. The first being that enforcement of these businesses is a federal mandate, with any budget mainly committed to cracking down on illegal brick-and-mortar stores. Although it can be easy to point the finger at law enforcement, Cheek feels this issue does not necessarily fall entirely on their shoulders. He pointed out that the people who do the work are often bound by instructions and mandates that have come from other powers. He has spoken to law enforcement agencies across the country and says there's an overwhelming sense of frustration coming from them. They understand what can be done but are not given the tools, finances, or proper support. Disrupting the online business itself is actually relatively simple, he said. You could literally do this overnight and probably take down 70% of the online activity from a cannabis perspective in Canada. He added that the problems mainly lie in jurisdictional issues because many online stores don't indicate where they are based. Further, only Quebec and Ontario have an actual cannabis task force designed to deal with illicit online activity. It's not to say that law enforcement doesn't talk to each other. They absolutely do, said Cheek. But those communications are limited. The information sharing is limited, and obviously if there are no resources in the province they're talking to, then essentially nothing gets done. The issue is not only relegated to Canada either. The same problem exists across the border in the United States, with a similar lack of online enforcement. Cheek gave an example of some data COIAS has collected over the last few weeks regarding New York-based online cannabis sales. When raids have occurred and people have been arrested, there's clear evidence that products are moving across the border. New York State, for example, has its own cannabis task force that they have exactly the same issue, whereas they are only mandated to tackle brick and mortar. It actually states that in their legal documentation. Strachan reached out to the RCMP for comment on their practices in this area. In keeping with its mandate, the RCMP's federal policing program investigates and disrupts the most serious and complex criminal threats to the safety and security of Canadians and Canadian interests, including transnational and serious organized crime involvement in the illegal cannabis market, said Robin Percival, a spokesperson for the organization. Percival added that the policing responsibility is a collaborative effort for different facets of law enforcement in Canada. Federal, provincial, and municipal police forces share responsibility to enforce the Cannabis Act. As such, an integrated resource to criminal involvement in the cannabis market is essential to uphold public safety. As for any steps being taken outside the police system, the Ontario Cannabis Store is doing what it can to inform the government of the necessity of enforcement against unlicensed online cannabis ventures. The OCS mandate does not include enforcement against illegal cannabis sellers. However, the OCS works continuously with other government stakeholders to ensure they understand the challenges facing the cannabis industry and the importance of enforcing the law against illegal cannabis operators, said Solomon Israel, Senior Communications Advisor. One of the more obvious ways Cheek believes will help this issue would be for the Canadian federal government to mandate a budget for online enforcement of illegal websites. The lack of funding is one of the wrenches in the whole system when it comes to policing. He added that the system is malfunctioning from top to bottom, and the people who can actually do something about it are mired in red tape. From an evidence-gathering standpoint, the evidence is already there. It's in your face, he said. These illicit websites openly sell the products. They're not on provincial lists. Often they're selling scheduled drugs alongside cannabis, and they're providing payment information. All of that information is obtainable in less than a minute on the website. Cheek added that identifying the websites and actively working to take them down is the first step, but a consistent, sustained effort needs to be implemented in order to actually make an ongoing difference. If you took 700 websites down today, 450 would probably come back within 24 hours, he said. If you have the right components in place to be looking for those 450, they could be very quickly disrupted again. So this issue has been well entrenched ever since legalization took place, and we're not seeing much action on it, and frankly, I'm not so sure we ever will. Believe it or not, we have reached the conclusion of another episode. We are coming very close. We're about 2 episodes away from this podcast celebrating its 6th anniversary of being a podcast in the Canadian cannabis culture. So that's coming up. That's pretty exciting. But now let's finish with a little humor for you in this episode. Some things to keep a smile on your face. Why did the marijuana plant get a job as a comedian? It always had people laughing their butts off. What do you call a stoner who forgets where he hid his stash? Lost in pot. What's a stoner's favorite type of math? Hybrid algebra. How do you know that marijuana is becoming more accepted? When they start rolling out the green carpet. Well, I hope that brought a chuckle to your face. Again, those ones are coming to us from naturallyfunny.com/marijuana jokes. And you can take a peek at them for yourself if you need more in your life. Thanks so much for being here. And from the guy in the clouds, that's it for episode 178 of the Cannabis Potcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Potcast.